Hello everyone. Today we're going to be dealing with the quadratic formula. So we're still solving for x when we have either a binomial or a trinomial equaling 0, but this is another way to solve it. This also helps us when you can't actually factor. So we're going to end up with some answers that have some square roots, but a lot of our answers will be whole numbers or nice fractions. So the quadratic formula is this right here. So this is definitely something that you are going to want to write at the very top of your paper. On the assignment, I have it at the very top. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. There's a lot about this formula, so today is only like day one. We're going to be doing a little bit more about it next week as to what exactly this means. Right now, we're just going to practice plugging in numbers and finding the answer. So remember that a is always the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, and c is the constant. So having your equation set equal to 0 is going to be telling you what numbers to put in for each of those letters. So here's our steps for solving using the quadratic formula. Step 1 is you're going to set the equation equal to 0. You're going to come across more of them on this week that do not say equal 0, so you will have to actually make them say equal 0. We'll be practicing that in this video. You are then going to identify what number is A, B, and C. Then you replace A, B, and C in the quadratic formula. So whatever numbers A, B, and C are is what you're going to plug in for those letters. You're going to use order of operations to simplify. And then you're going to find both answers. Because if you noticed in the equation, there's this plus or minus, which means this is a condensed form of two different answers. You can do that entire equation using the plus sign, or you can do the entire thing using the minus sign. So I'll be showing you how that works. So here's our first equation. We have x squared plus 3x equals 4. Step 1, it needs to say equals 0. So I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. Since none of those are like terms, my equation now says x squared plus 3x minus 4 equals 0. Now, even if you can factor it, you're not going to factor it. I need to see your work with the quadratic equation. So yes, you will come across ones where you can factor. Don't do it. I want to see the quadratic formula. So our quadratic formula, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So if we look at our equation, a is the coefficient of x squared, so that's a 1. Remember, if there's no number, it's a 1. B is the coefficient of x, so it's a 3. And c is the constant, so it's a negative 4. Don't lose your negatives. Okay, x equals, my first thing is negative b, so that's going to be a negative 3 plus or minus the square root of, so I'm going to make a big old square root sign, b squared, so that's going to be 3 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 4, all over 2a. Oop, a is 1. I forgot to replace it. Okay, so let's do some simplifying. The first thing you're going to want to do is deal with underneath the radical sign. So I'm going to do some pieces. So I know that 3 squared is 9, and I know that negative 4 times 1 times negative 4 is a positive 16. So putting that together, that means I now have negative 3 plus or minus the square root of, and 9 plus 16 is 25 over 2. Now on a lot of them, you're going to come across answers that you can take the square root of the number. If you can't, you would be done. This one we can. So the square root of 25 is 5. So now we have x equals negative 3 plus or minus 5 over 2. So I have simplified using order of operations. Now what I need to do is separate my two different answers. One is a plus and one is a minus, and figure out what they are. So this gets me negative 3 plus 5 over 2, or negative 3 minus 5 over 2. Actually, that should be an and sign. And, because there's two answers. Okay, so let's figure out what this is. Negative 3 plus 5 is 2 divided by 2 is 1. Negative 3 minus 5 is negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. So there's my two answers. X can either equal negative 4 or 1. So those are my two answers for X. So I've used the quadratic formula, I've plugged in my numbers, I've used order of operations, and I found my two answers. Okay, let's try another one. So here's problem number 2 of, I believe it's just 2. This is the last one we're going to do. So first of all, this doesn't say equals 0, so let's make it say equals 0. I'm going to subtract x squared from both sides, and I'm going to put all my stuff under like terms. I'm also going to add 1 at the same time, because all of that is going to become a 0. 3x squareds minus an x squared gets us 2x squareds. There were no other x's to add or subtract, so my negative 4x stays the same. And negative 4 plus 1 is negative 3. So that means that A is a 2, that's the coefficient of x squared, B is a negative 4, coefficient of x, and C is a negative 3, the constant at the end. So again, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You can actually say that while singing Happy Birthday. It works. Okay, maybe I'll sing it for you later. So x equals, let's plug in some numbers. Now this is where we need to be careful with our negatives, because in the quadratic formula it says negative b, and my b is negative. So we would have a negative 4, and two negatives just make that a positive. So that really just becomes a 4. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. So I'm going to put my negative 4 in parentheses, because negative 4 squared means I need to go negative 4 times negative 4, and we'll deal with that in a little bit. Minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is negative 3, all over 2 times a, which is 2. So let's do some simplifying here. So I have negative 4 squared. So negative 4 times negative 4 is 16. And then I have negative 4 times 2, which is negative 8, times negative 3, which is a positive 24. Then, if I write this as 4 plus or minus the square root of 40 over 2 times 2 is 4. I don't know the square root of 40. It's a decimal. It's not a whole number. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to leave this alone. And I'm going to write it as my two answers. So the first one is 4 plus the square root of 40 over 4. And the other one is 4 minus the square root of 40 over 4. So I just separated it into my two plus or minus signs, and those are my two answers. So there are some things that you can simplify. We're not going to get into that right now. That would be for a later time, or if we were actually in my classroom, we would be probably simplifying that. But right now, it's not quite something we're going to deal with. So that is how you deal with the quadratic formula. Your assignment is going to be basically the same stuff for 3 days, because this isn't necessarily the easiest thing to do. So it takes a little bit of practice. Each of your assignments, I think, has 6 problems. Your word of the day for today is quadratic, and your assignment is the quadratic formula part 1. Show up for office hours. If you have any questions on Wednesday or Thursday, message me, email me. Don't forget to get your attendance done too. Have a great day.